For the first time, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands will be opening a transitional shelter for its homeless waitlisters. The agency will hold a blessing on Monday for the federally funded $6.4 million.
Millions of Americans are still working and still homeless. Not on sidewalks, not in tents. They're living in RVs on public land because rent no longer fits paychecks. Across the western United States, federal land has become America's last housing system. Unplanned, unmanaged, and quietly overwhelmed. This isn't a lifestyle trend. It's what happens when housing collapses. Quartzsite is the most extreme example of how public land has become America's unofficial housing system. Located in La Paz County, the area is surrounded by over 1 million acres of BLM-managed land, much of it flat, accessible, and legally open to dispersed camping. Every winter, population estimates surge dramatically as RVs flood the desert, temporarily multiplying the town's year-round population many times over. What makes Quartzsite unique is scale. This is not a handful of RVs, it is a mass migration. The area has become a destination for retirees, fixed-income households, displaced workers, and people escaping rising rents across the West. For many, living on public land here is not recreational. It is the only way to survive on limited income. When median rents in nearby regions exceed what Social Security or disability checks can cover, the desert becomes the fallback. Federal rules allow 14 days of free camping within a 28-day period, requiring RVs to move at least 25 miles afterward. Quartzsite's geography makes this rotation easy, allowing people to remain nearby without violating rules. In addition, nearby long-term visitor areas offer low-cost seasonal permits, reinforcing the area's role as a semi-permanent housing zone. The downside is strain. Trash accumulation, human waste, and environmental damage increase every year. Cleanup costs have risen into the millions of dollars annually, signaling that public land is absorbing population pressure far beyond what it was designed to handle. Quartzsite exposes the reality that public land is no longer just recreation space, it is functioning as housing of last resort. Yuma has become a critical overflow zone for people pushed out of housing across the Southwest. Its importance comes from geography, climate, and proximity to work. Yuma sits near vast stretches of federally managed desert, where dispersed RV camping is legal outside city limits, making it one of the few places where people can still live without rent while staying close to jobs, medical care, and supply chains. Housing pressure in Yuma County has intensified steadily. Rents rose sharply after 2020, while wages, especially in agriculture, logistics, and service work, lagged behind. For many seasonal and year-round workers, an RV became the only viable shelter that allowed them to stay employed. Living on public land made it possible to survive without entering shelters or overcrowded shared housing. Unlike more remote desert hubs, Yuma operates under layered enforcement. Border proximity means increased federal presence from agencies not directly related to land management. While RV camping itself remains legal on BLM land, vehicle checks and patrol activity are common, creating a sense of constant observation. This discourages large visible clusters and forces campers to stay dispersed and mobile. Water access is the defining limitation. The surrounding desert has no natural water sources for campers, requiring all water to be hauled in. Combined with extreme summer heat, this creates high daily survival costs despite free land. Cooling systems, generators, and fuel become essential just to remain safe. Yuma illustrates a key shift. Free RV living is no longer isolated to retirees or travelers. It has become a survival strategy for working Americans, legal, fragile, and increasingly shaped by external pressures unrelated to housing policy. Kingman represents the quiet working-class side of free RV living, less visible than major hubs but just as important. The city sits inside Mojave County, where over 70% of the land is publicly owned, creating extensive zones where dispersed RV camping is legal outside city limits. This availability, combined with low population density, has made Kingman a fallback location for people who are still working but no longer able to afford housing. The pressure point is affordability. Since 2019, home prices in the region increased rapidly, while wages tied to logistics, warehousing, retail, and highway services stayed relatively flat. Many residents didn't experience a dramatic eviction. Instead, leases simply became impossible to renew. An RV parked on nearby public land became the only way to remain close to employment along Interstate 40 and historic Route 66. Heat is the primary environmental risk. Summer temperatures frequently exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit, making power generation essential. RV dwellers rely heavily on solar and generators, which raises fuel costs and increases fire risk. As a result, enforcement focuses less on camping itself and more on safety violations such as illegal dumping and fire hazards. Cleanup operations linked to unmanaged campsites have increased steadily, signaling growing strain on land managers. Kingman also illustrates invisibility. RV dwellers here rarely cluster in large groups. They spread out, rotate locations, and blend into the landscape to avoid complaints. This keeps the issue out of headlines but does not reduce its scale. Kingman shows how free public land is absorbing people who are not homeless by choice, not unemployed, and not seeking attention, just trying to stay housed enough to keep working. Sedona illustrates how extreme housing costs push people to the very edges of legality. Inside the city, overnight vehicle living is aggressively restricted, leaving no room for RV dwellers. The pressure comes from affordability. Sedona's median home price climbed past $1 million, while the local economy remains dominated by tourism, hospitality, and service jobs that pay a fraction of what housing now requires. This mismatch forces workers outward rather than upward. The relief valve sits just beyond city limits in Coconino National Forest, where dispersed camping is permitted along designated forest roads. Federal rules allow 14 days of camping within a 30-day window, after which relocation is required. Because access roads are limited by terrain and vegetation, usable RV spots are concentrated into a small number of corridors, creating competition and rapid turnover. Tourism magnifies enforcement. Sedona attracts millions of visitors each year, and local political pressure prioritizes scenery and visitor experience. In response, land managers have reduced available dispersed camping areas and closed dozens of spur roads over the past few years to control crowding, erosion, and sanitation issues. Rangers now rely on site markings and vehicle tracking to enforce stay limits. Geography adds another constraint. Steep grades, rocky roads, and forest density restrict RV size and mobility. Large rigs struggle to relocate quickly, increasing the risk of violations. Sedona shows how free RV living can exist only in narrow margins, legal on paper, and tightly constrained in practice, serving as last resort shelter for workers who keep the tourism economy running, but cannot live within it. Flagstaff is one of the most physically demanding places in the Southwest to live for free on public land, and that difficulty defines who can survive there. Sitting at nearly 7,000 feet in elevation, Flagstaff experiences long winters, heavy snowfall, and sustained freezing temperatures. Average annual snowfall exceeds 100 inches, making winter RV living impossible without insulation, heating systems, and reliable power. Housing pressure in Flagstaff is severe. As a university town and regional hub, demand for rentals consistently outpaces supply. Short-term rentals and student housing have reduced long-term availability, while prices continue to rise. When leases end, many residents cannot relocate locally, forcing them outward into surrounding national forest land. Dispersed camping is allowed on designated forest roads, but access is limited. Snowpack, mud seasons, and road closures dramatically shrink the number of usable sites throughout the year. This concentrates RV dwellers into fewer areas, increasing visibility and enforcement. To manage impact, land managers introduced rotating closures and permit systems in high-use zones. Fire risk shapes policy. Northern Arizona has faced escalating wildfire threats, prompting strict fire bans and campsite restrictions. RV dwellers relying on propane or generators face sudden limitations, forcing relocation during high-risk periods. These disruptions often occur with little notice. Flagstaff demonstrates that free RV living is not just about legality, it's about endurance. The land is technically available, but only to those who can withstand altitude, cold, and constant movement. For everyone else, Flagstaff becomes a temporary stop, not a sustainable solution. Las Vegas shows how major metro areas quietly push displacement into surrounding federal land. Clark County is encircled by millions of acres of BLM-managed desert, creating a vast buffer where RV living is legal outside city limits. As housing costs surged after 2020, this desert ring became a last resort shelter zone for people who still work in the city but can no longer afford rent. The divide is sharp. Inside Las Vegas, overnight vehicle dwelling is heavily enforced. Outside the city boundary, the same activity becomes legal simply by crossing onto federal land. This has produced a daily commute pattern where RV dwellers live in the desert and drive into the city for work, groceries, and medical care, remaining largely invisible in official housing counts. Heat is the defining danger. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit, placing extreme strain on RV cooling systems. Equipment failures during heat waves can become life-threatening within hours. Heat-related deaths in southern Nevada disproportionately affect people living outdoors or in vehicles, making summer survival a constant risk calculation rather than a lifestyle choice. Enforcement focuses on environmental impact rather than occupancy. Illegal dumping, human waste, and fire risk have driven cleanup costs into the millions of dollars annually, prompting increased patrols and periodic sweeps. These actions do not eliminate RV living, they simply push it farther from roads and services. Las Vegas demonstrates how public land functions as an unofficial housing extension for large cities. The city grows, tourism thrives, and workers remain employed. But the cost of housing is quietly exported to the surrounding desert, where survival replaces stability. Reno illustrates how fast economic growth can turn public land into a pressure zone almost overnight. Over the last decade, Reno transformed from a low-cost alternative to California into a high-demand metro, driven by tech expansion, logistics hubs, and in-migration. Housing supply failed to keep pace, pushing prices and rents beyond what many long-term residents could absorb. The displacement did not funnel into shelters, it flowed outward. Public land in Washoe County begins just beyond the urban edge, making it possible for RV dwellers to remain close to jobs while avoiding city enforcement. This proximity is both an advantage and a vulnerability. Unlike remote desert hubs, Reno's public land sits next to expanding suburbs, which increases complaints and political pressure. Climate compounds the challenge. Winters bring prolonged cold rather than extreme snowfall, draining batteries and stressing plumbing systems. Heating becomes a constant expense, eroding the financial advantage of free land. Wind exposure across high desert flats increases wear on rigs and raises fire risk during dry periods. Enforcement here is active and coordinated. County sheriffs and federal land managers respond to neighborhood complaints with targeted sweeps, breaking up RV clusters and forcing repeated relocation. This creates instability rather than resolution, disrupting work schedules and access to services. Reno shows how public land near growing cities becomes contested territory. RV living remains legal, but only through constant movement and invisibility. As suburban development expands outward, the buffer between city and desert shrinks, leaving fewer places for displaced residents to go. Tonopah represents the far end of America's free public land safety net, where legality exists mainly because almost no one is watching. The town sits in Nye County, one of the largest counties in the lower 48, yet with an extremely small population spread across vast distances. This imbalance leaves enormous stretches of nearby federal land functionally unmanaged day to day, making dispersed RV camping possible with minimal pressure. What pushes people here is not opportunity, but elimination of alternatives. Housing options are limited, aging, and scarce. When residents lose housing, shelters are often hundreds of miles away. Living on nearby public land becomes the only immediate option that does not involve criminalization. Unlike larger hubs, Tonopah has no tourism economy demanding cleanup or aesthetic enforcement. Isolation is the trade-off. Emergency response times are long, and advanced medical care is distant. Supply runs for food, fuel, and water often require extended travel, increasing monthly expenses despite zero rent. Cell coverage is inconsistent, limiting remote work and emergency communication. Climate adds another layer of risk. Winter nights routinely drop into deep freezes, while summer days reach extreme highs. RV dwellers must be self-sufficient in both heating and cooling, filtering out anyone without reliable power systems. There is little margin for equipment failure. Tonopah shows the final fallback stage of free RV living. Public land here functions not as a community or solution, but as a holding space, where people can remain legal only by accepting isolation, distance from services, and constant self-reliance. Moab exposes one of the sharpest contradictions in the American housing crisis, a town generating massive tourism revenue while quietly pushing its workforce onto public land. Grand County has a very small permanent population, yet it absorbs millions of visitors every year, creating constant demand for low-wage labor in hospitality, food service, guiding, and maintenance. Housing supply has not scaled with that demand. As rents climbed and long-term rentals disappeared, RV living on surrounding BLM land became an informal housing system for workers. Unlike remote desert locations, Moab's public land is highly regulated. Camping is restricted to designated areas, sites are numbered, and enforcement is frequent. The standard 14-day limit is closely monitored because crowding is severe. Environmental sensitivity drives strict rules. The desert around Moab contains fragile biological soil crust that can take decades to recover once damaged. Because of this, off-road travel and illegal campsites carry heavy penalties. Fines for violations can reach 4 figures, a devastating hit for people already living paycheck to paycheck. The economic pressure is relentless. Tourism peaks seasonally, meaning many workers are employed only part of the year, while housing costs remain high year-round. RV dwellers often cycle between legal camps, short-term rentals, and couch surfing depending on enforcement and income flow. Moab demonstrates how public land is being repurposed by necessity, not design. It is not chosen for freedom or lifestyle, but because it is the only remaining space where workers can stay close to jobs without paying rent they cannot afford. St. George shows how a fast-growing success city quietly creates displacement. Washington County has been one of the fastest-growing regions in the Mountain West for years, driven by retirees, second home buyers, and remote workers. As demand surged, housing prices reset upward, but wages in hospitality, retail, healthcare support, and construction did not. The result wasn't mass evictions. It was people simply being unable to re-lease. Public land outside city limits absorbed that pressure. RV dwellers positioned themselves several miles from neighborhoods on BLM-managed desert, rotating locations to avoid violations. Many are still fully employed, commuting daily into town for work, groceries, and medical care, yet they remain absent from homelessness statistics because they are not in shelters or encampments. Heat defines survival here. Southern Utah experiences prolonged summers where daily temperatures remain dangerously high for weeks at a time. RV air conditioning systems are pushed to their limits, and when power fails, heat exhaustion can occur rapidly. During peak summer months, many RV dwellers are forced to abandon the area entirely, turning St. George into a seasonal refuge rather than a stable solution. Water access compounds the problem. There are no natural water sources available to campers, meaning every gallon must be hauled. This adds recurring cost and limits how long people can remain in one place. St. George illustrates how growth does not eliminate housing crises, it displaces them outward, turning nearby federal land into an unplanned housing layer with no infrastructure or permanence. Grand Junction highlights how mid-sized cities quietly rely on public land to absorb housing fallout. Mesa County benefits from healthcare, logistics, and energy-related employment, which keeps people working, but housing availability has not kept pace. When pandemic-era protections ended, displacement increased without large public encampments forming. Public land surrounding the city became the buffer. RV dwellers often remain employed, living just outside city limits on BLM-managed land while commuting into town. This allows them to avoid urban parking enforcement while maintaining access to jobs, groceries, and medical services. Because camps are dispersed, the scale of displacement remains largely invisible. Environmental risk shapes enforcement. The region faces frequent fire restrictions due to dry conditions and wind exposure. RV dwellers using generators or propane systems face sudden bans that force relocation with little notice. These disruptions make stable employment difficult, even for people working full-time. Winter conditions add strain. While snowfall is lighter than in mountain towns, freezing nights are common, increasing wear on water systems and batteries. RV dwellers must invest in winterization just to remain functional. Grand Junction demonstrates a critical reality. Public land is not housing, but it is being used as one. It allows working people to remain economically productive while lacking the stability, safety, and protections of real shelter. The land provides legal space to exist, but it cannot provide the security or infrastructure that actual housing requires. This gap between legality and livability defines the experience of thousands of working Americans who have been displaced from traditional housing markets, yet remain invisible in official counts. Durango shows how geography itself limits free RV living, even when public land is legally available. The city sits at high elevation, surrounded by national forest where dispersed camping is permitted on designated roads. On paper, this creates opportunity. In reality, weather determines who can stay and for how long. Housing pressure in La Plata County is driven by tourism, second home ownership, and a limited rental market. Service workers, seasonal employees, and contract laborers often cannot secure long-term housing, forcing them into RVs during peak months. RV living here is rarely permanent. It is a stopgap between seasons. Winter is the hard cutoff. Snow arrives early and lingers late, closing forest access roads and making camping unsafe for non-winterized rigs. Once snowpack builds, legal camping zones effectively disappear. This forces RV dwellers to migrate or abandon the area, regardless of employment. Forest management policies further restrict access. Seasonal road closures rotate annually to reduce environmental damage and protect wildlife corridors. Fire restrictions are strict, limiting heating options even during cold snaps. These rules are enforced consistently due to the area's environmental sensitivity. Durango demonstrates that legality alone does not equal viability. Public land exists, but climate and land management compress the window of survival. Free RV living here is temporary by design, shaped not by policy intent, but by elevation, snow, and seasonal closure. The region allows RV dwelling in theory, but environmental conditions make it unsustainable in practice, creating a system where legality exists without long-term stability. Boise demonstrates how speed, not collapse, can trigger displacement. In a short span, Boise shifted from an affordable regional center to a high-demand growth market. In-migration from higher-cost states accelerated housing demand faster than supply could respond. Prices adjusted quickly. Wages did not. The result was a quiet exclusion of lower-income residents rather than visible mass evictions. Public land on the city's outskirts absorbed that pressure. BLM-managed foothills and desert parcels sit close enough for daily commuting, making RV living a functional, if unstable, housing substitute. Many RV dwellers remain employed, using public land to stay near jobs while avoiding urban parking enforcement. Conflict defines this region. Boise's public land is heavily multi-use. Recreation, grazing, shooting areas, and conservation overlap with dispersed camping. As suburban development expanded outward, complaints increased. Enforcement shifted toward rotation, fire safety, and proximity limits rather than outright bans. The outcome is frequent displacement, legal to camp, but never to settle. Climate adds cost. Winters bring prolonged freezes that stress batteries, water lines, and heating systems. RV dwellers face higher operating expenses despite free land, narrowing the financial margin that initially made vehicle living possible. Summer fire seasons introduce sudden closures, forcing relocation with little notice. Boise shows how public land near booming metros becomes contested terrain. It functions as a temporary buffer for the working displaced, legal, necessary, and increasingly unstable, until growth consumes the space that once made it possible. Bend reveals how climate instability is breaking the final safety net for free RV living. The city experienced rapid in-migration as remote workers and second home buyers flooded the market. Housing prices surged while service sector wages lagged, pushing workers toward surrounding national forest land where dispersed camping is legally allowed. What makes Bend different is wildfire. Severe fire seasons now dominate the region. When fire danger escalates, the Forest Service imposes full closures across large sections of forest land. During these periods, all legal dispersed camping disappears overnight. RV dwellers are forced to leave immediately, regardless of employment, health, or resources. These closures are not short disruptions. Smoke events can last weeks, creating dangerous air quality conditions that disproportionately affect people living in vehicles without filtration. Respiratory issues increase sharply during peak fire months, turning RV living into a health risk rather than a housing solution. City enforcement does not pause during closures. Overnight parking remains restricted within Bend, leaving displaced RV dwellers with no legal fallback nearby. This creates sudden displacement waves that push people long distances or into violation territory. Bend demonstrates a critical shift. Public land can no longer be relied on as emergency housing when climate volatility removes access without warning. Free RV living here exists only until the next fire season, making stability impossible even for those who follow every rule. The land itself has become unreliable, subject to forces beyond human control or policy decisions. Susanville represents one of the last places in California where free RV living remains legally possible with relatively low pressure. Located in Lassen County, the area is surrounded by vast stretches of public land with minimal tourism and limited suburban expansion. This lack of visibility is the key reason RV living persists here, while it has been restricted elsewhere in the state. Housing displacement in California has pushed people farther inland, away from coastal job centers and enforcement-heavy cities. Susanville absorbs this spillover. RV dwellers here are often people who tried to remain near employment corridors but were forced outward by rising rents, parking bans, and aggressive enforcement. Public land becomes the final legal option before complete disconnection. Isolation defines survival. Employment opportunities are limited, healthcare access is sparse, and specialized services require long-distance travel. This creates a trade-off: legality in exchange for opportunity. Many RV dwellers survive on remote income, fixed benefits, or seasonal work rather than local jobs. Climate adds another burden. Winters are long and cold, requiring reliable heating and winterized systems. Snow can limit access to remote camping areas, increasing self-reliance requirements. Unlike desert hubs, there is little seasonal migration relief. Susanville exposes the end stage of displacement. Free public land still exists, but only in places far from economic growth. Legality remains, but stability, opportunity, and access steadily disappear. The farther people are pushed from the system. The land is available, but everything else necessary for sustainable living gradually vanishes with distance. Lake Havasu City illustrates how resort towns quietly generate year-round displacement. While the city markets boating, snowbird tourism, and second home living, housing costs have risen far beyond what local service wages support. As demand surged, long-term rentals shrank, and many residents found themselves priced out without ever appearing in eviction data. The release valve sits outside city limits on surrounding BLM-managed desert, where dispersed RV camping is legal. RV dwellers spread out along access roads and gravel flats to avoid attention, rotating sites to comply with federal stay rules. Many continue working locally in hospitality, retail, construction, and marina services, commuting daily while remaining absent from official homelessness counts. Heat is the dominant survival factor. Lake Havasu regularly ranks among the hottest cities in the United States, with extended summer periods that push RV electrical systems to failure. Cooling is not optional, it is life-critical. Generator dependence increases fuel costs and fire risk, making equipment reliability a constant concern. Water access defines logistics. Desert camping areas offer no water infrastructure, requiring frequent hauling and adding recurring expense despite free land. Summer heat also accelerates wear on batteries, tires, and plumbing systems, shortening the lifespan of already aging rigs. Lake Havasu City demonstrates how lifestyle destinations export housing instability into surrounding public land. The city thrives economically, while its workforce survives just beyond the boundary, legal, unseen, and exposed. It shows that free RV living is no longer about mobility or choice, but about proximity to work in places where housing no longer matches local incomes. This system didn't fail quietly. It failed people who did everything right. If this is happening near you, say where you live and what you're seeing in the comments. And in the next video, we break down what happens when public land starts closing and who gets pushed out first.